Okay. The next section we're going to do here is titled um, Colonial Regimes. And there's two important concepts that we want to talk about in that section. The first of which is this difference between direct and indirect rule. So when the Europeans would go and take over a country, sometimes they would fight them and try to conquer them. Oftentimes, though, they would go to the leaders with all of their weapons and clear superiority militarily over the oppositions, over the local people, and they would try and work out a deal with them. This was easier for European countries. This was more ideal for the European countries, that they, instead of having to fight with the local population, which of course would cause some loss of life, would also cost money. Wars are very expensive. And then send in a police force to police these people for the foreseeable future. The best alternative for the Europeans and oftentimes for the local people was for the local people to cut a deal with the Europeans. So in the first example we give, which is the Europeans coming in, taking over the land through force, and then sending in a police force to rule over the local people, having governors or some sort of representative of the king there to rule over the local people and actually rule over each and every single person's life. This is called direct rule. The best example of this is how the French ruled the Vietnamese. And we're going to find that the Vietnamese become very upset with the French because of this type of rule. It does cause great resentment towards the foreign power, the other who comes in with all their weapons and rules over me with force. The other example was going to be called indirect rule. England was famous, especially in India, for using this type of rule, where they would cut a deal with a local ruler and say, look, we'll let you stay in power. Your police can still be the police of the streets. You just have to do what we say. This was a much more common type of rule. And again, we see England do this in India. They work towards this in Singapore and in Burma. And the benefit to this was that, okay, we don't have to have a big police force. We don't have to spend as much money to control the colonies, but we still get what we want. And what these people wanted was the raw materials, the natural resources of the area, what that they would then bring back to the mother country, to England or France or the Netherlands or whatever European country was ruling, and use it in their industrial revolution, in their factories, in their industry. Um, um, so we can imagine that this having a European come in, whether it be through direct or indirect rule, um, taking natural resources, oftentimes demanding low paid labor, and whether they're ruling themselves or letting the local people rule, this was not a good experience for the areas that were taken over. But there were some good things about the Europeans coming in. We're going to see this mostly in India, but in all the countries, Europeans oftentimes they would build roads and schools, and sometimes even factories in the area. Um, they would sometimes create jobs, although low-paying jobs at these factories, or maybe cutting down trees for natural resources, or extracting palm oil or other things. The workers would get paid; they weren't slaves, but these were low-paying jobs. We still see this today. We see American corporations and European corporations going overseas, setting up factories, paying people very low prices to make goods that would cost a lot more to make. in our local economy. So this type of um, economy where a big power comes in and it sets up factories and creates low-paying jobs there for the local population, it still kind of goes on today. And it does benefit the local population because there's a job and there's some money and I can feed my family, but these aren't high-paying jobs. And in the long run, this hurts the local peoples because they're losing their natural resources of the land. Sure, there are some middle class jobs created. We can see that the business owners and the upper echelon of management of these factories or of the plantations where they would pull natural resources were often Europeans, but we can say that middle management jobs, directly overseeing the people, were sometimes local population, and that these people would then make a little more money and might even be middle class in the local area, have a little extra money to spend on things that they want instead of things they need. So although we know that the long-term result is that these areas turn out to be some of the poorest areas in the world, um, because of the extraction of natural resources from their land for very little pay, there were some benefits. I don't want to put a percentage, what was more, was it 90-10? Was it 80-20? Was it 70-30 benefits versus negatives? Um, but we want to mention also that it wasn't all bad, mostly bad. I don't know what the right way of looking at it is.